Numbers 24. Good to see everybody in the class this morning. I'm going to keep sitting down for another week or two if y'all don't care. So, while my back muscles heal up, muscles are all right, but I've got a little nerve that's firing sometimes. Numbers 24, the lesson is going to be about, it's a subject that we studied, it's been a few months ago, I guess you could say, regarding Balaam and Balak's desire to curse Israel, but we're going to take this passage into a different direction. So we'll begin in Numbers 24, verse number 10, and we'll read down through verse number 19. Numbers 24, verse 10, it says, And Balak's anger was kindled against Balaam, and he smote his hands together. And Balak said unto Balaam, I called thee to curse mine enemies, and behold, thou hast altogether blessed them these 3 times. Therefore now flee thou to thy place. I thought to promote thee unto great honor, but lo, the Lord hath kept thee back from honor. And Balaam said unto Balak, Spake I not also to thy messengers which thou sendest unto me, saying, If Balak would give me his house full of silver and gold, I cannot go beyond the commandment of the Lord, to either good or bad of mine own mind. But what the Lord saith, what will I speak? That will I speak. And now behold, I go unto my people. Come therefore, and I will advertise thee what this people shall do to thy people in the latter days. And he took up this parable and said, Balaam the son of Beor hath said, and the man whose eyes are open hath said, he hath said, which heard the words of God and knew the knowledge of the Most High, which saw the vision of the Almighty, fallen into a trance, but having his eyes open. And I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and shall smite the corners of Moab, and destroy all the children of Sheth. And Edom shall be a possession. Seir, Mount Seir also shall be a possession for his enemies, and Israel shall do valiantly. Out of Jacob shall come he that shall have dominion, and shall destroy him that remaineth in the city. And he took up, when he looked up on Amalek, and when he looked on Amalek, he took up his parable and said, Amalek was the first of the nations, but his latter end shall be that he perisheth forever. I'm going to stop there. His latter end shall be that he perisheth forever. So we're going to look at 2 different peoples in this passage, the Moabites and the Amalekites, and just see what Balaam has to say about them in this prophetic passage. Now, we studied in depth who Balaam was a while back. We know Balaam was a soothsayer that had been hired by Balak, the king of Moab, to curse Israel. And so the names are familiar. They're similar. Balak, Balaam is like kind of a tongue twister. Who's who? Well, Balak is the king of Moab, and Balaam is the prophet or soothsayer of his day. 3 chapters devoted to this account. Quite interesting. But I want to notice in verse number 14, and we'll pick up the thought here. Verse number 14, Now behold, I go unto my people. Come therefore, and I will advertise thee what this people shall do to thy people. Notice this. What this people, the children of Israel, shall do to thy people, the Moabites, in the latter days. Okay, so this word latter, if you'll notice, there's sometimes when I read verses, words kind of jump off the page at me, and I want to, do an investigation as to what they mean, maybe the root word that they come from, because it's talking about the latter days. He's not talking about that day. He's talking about the latter days. Well, what are the latter days? The latter days can mean different things in the scriptures. That it doesn't always mean the end days. It can mean later on and so forth. And so let's notice this word latter can come from several different Hebrew words, actually, with a variation of meanings. And in this particular passage, the H, if you have a strong concordance, H319 is the number associated with this word, and it's associated with time. And it's associated with, in conjunction with days or an end, like latter end or latter days. There's other words that are translated latter, like for instance, let's go to Job 29 and verse 23. Job 29 and verse number 23. And it says here, and they waited for me as the rain, and they opened their mouth wide as for the latter rain. So that word latter there is not the same word as we see in Numbers regarding the latter days. This is talking about a spring rain and so forth. So I'm just showing you that this word latter can come from different Hebrew words. It has different meanings. But we want to pick up in our text, go back to Numbers 24, and we're going to look at another verse. Go down to verse number 20, because the word latter is also used in that verse. It says in Numbers 24:20, and when he looked on Amalek, he took up his parable and said, Amalek was the first of the nations, but his latter end shall be that he perisheth forever. That's the same H319. So that latter end and latter days, same word in verse number 14 and verse number 20. All right. So this is associated with time, associated with days. We notice in Jeremiah chapter 23, and let's go over there and have another reference to this. In Jeremiah 23, verse number 20, it says here, the anger of the Lord shall not return until he have executed, until he have performed the thoughts of his heart. In the latter days ye shall consider it perfectly. Now, in Isaiah and Jeremiah, you do have the word latter used quite a lot, and it's that same H319. All right, if you have a strong concordance, or you can get an app on your phone to look at these things. But this H319 is always associated with time, or an ending of time, or days. All right, so in the latter days ye shall consider it perfectly. Now, as we look at Jeremiah 48, and we're going to come back to this, but I want to notice something here in Jeremiah 48 in verse number 46. This entire chapter is actually dedicated to the prophesying of the destruction of Moab. But notice in Jeremiah 48, verse 46, it says, woe be unto thee, O Moab, the people of Chemosh. Now that's a false god. Perisheth, for thy sons are taken captives and thy daughters captives. Yet will I bring again the captivity of Moab in the latter days, saith the Lord. Thus far is the judgment of Moab. That's that H319. Again, that same word used in Numbers that we saw, latter days, latter end. All right, so we want to go back and ask this question. We're going to focus first of all, as we looked at this prophecy, that it's interesting to me that God would use a false prophet to prophesy. But you know, God can make the rocks cry out if he wants to. He can use anything he wants to speak and to prophesy. And in this particular case, Balak had hired Balaam to curse Israel. Balaam was not allowed to, but he wanted to, because he was wanting to get paid. And he promised him a lot of money, gold, silver, and all kind of things. And Balaam was after the money. We studied that in detail in the lesson that we went into detail concerning this account in Numbers 21, 22, 23, 24. And so in this particular instance, Balaam wanted to curse Israel, but God would not let him. And so when he actually let loose with some cursing, it turned into blessings. And we notice that back in Numbers 24, verse number 14. It says, and behold, I go unto my people, Balaam was leaving. It says, come therefore, and I will advertise thee what this people, Israel, shall do to thy people, Moab, in the latter days. So that's the subject at hand. And so Balaam is revealing to Balak that not only is God not going to allow me to curse the people of Israel, but God is going to curse your people in the latter days. And you may not see it in your lifetime, but your people are going to see this. So let's notice next in Genesis 19, I want to reveal the beginning of Moab. You know, these particular kingdoms in the Old Testament usually went back to the birth of a male child. And a lot of times we find this in Genesis. And in Genesis 19, we find the beginning of the Moabites, and the way that they started out was definitely not blessed of God or anything of that sort. But in Genesis 19, verse number 24, it says, Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities and that which grew upon the ground. But his wife looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham got up early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord, and he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the plain, and behold, and lo, the smoke of the country went up as the smoke of a furnace. So imagine that. I was just reading that verse and was pondering what it must have felt like for Abraham to have gotten up that morning and looked towards where Sodom and Gomorrah was, and all he could see was smoke rising from that area. He knew the judgment of God had fallen on those cities. And so, he probably was wondering, what's become of my nephew Lot? Well, let's go on in verse number 29. It came to pass when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot dwelt. And Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the mountain, and his 2 daughters with him. That's all that was left of his family. For he feared to dwell in Zoar, and he dwelt in a cave, he and his 2 daughters. And the firstborn said unto the younger, this is the result of a man who had everything. He was with Abraham, the chosen one of God. He was blessed by being around him. He set his sights toward Sodom. He ended up in the gate of Sodom. He ended up interacting with the men of Sodom. He was actually captured at one time. Abraham had to go and deliver him and all of his goods and his family. And this is the end of this man's life, basically. He's destitute. He's living in a cave with his 2 daughters. His wife's out there, a pillar of salt. I don't know if that's still standing today or not, but we know God said it happened. And so we notice in verse number 30, he said he feared to live in Zoar, so he went and lived in a cave. Verse 31, and the firstborn said unto the younger, this is his daughters. Now I want you to think about how depraved the minds of his daughters were. Okay, it says, our father is old, and there's not a man in the earth to come in unto us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve seed of our father. That's a noble thing to do in their minds, but this was not of God. And they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father, and he perceived not when she lay down or when she arose. It came to pass on the morrow that the firstborn said unto the younger, behold, I lay yesternight with my father, let us make him drink wine this night also, and go thou in and lie with him, that we may preserve seed unto our father. And they made their father drink wine that night also, and the younger arose and lay with him, and he perceived not when she lay down or when she arose. Thus were both the daughters of Lot with child by their father, and the firstborn bare a son, and called his name Moab. So if you ever wonder where the Moabites come from, this is their beginning, their humble, wicked beginning. This is Lot's posterity. This is all he has left after living a life. He left his homeland in faith with Abraham, his father, and was right alongside him, and was blessed, and was so blessed that their cattle was so great the land couldn't handle them all, so they separated off, and Lot ended up in Sodom. And he was a saved man. And we see here that now the only thing left of his posterity are going to be the names of 2 men who are going to be the fathers of the Moabites and the Ammonites, who will become arch enemies of Israel. I mean, that's who Balak was back in Numbers 24. He's the king of Moab, a descendant of Lot's son, Moab. In verse number 37, the firstborn bare a son, called his name Moab, the same as the father of the Moabites unto this day. And the younger, she also bare a son, and called his name Ben-Ammi, the same as the father of the children of Ammon to this day. So the Ammonites and the Moabites, this is where they began. Now, I want you to notice in Micah chapter 6, we do see repeatedly in the Old Testament prophecies against Moab and Ammon. In fact, we just looked at Jeremiah chapter 48, and that entire chapter is a prophecy against the Moabites and their pending destruction. Fast forward into Micah. Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk. Micah 6, verse 5. Micah 6, verse 5. It says here, O my people, remember now what Balak, that's our subject, king of Moab, consulted, and what Balaam, the son of Beor, answered him from Shittim unto Gilgal, that you may know the righteousness of the Lord, wherewith shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before the nigh God. Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves of a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, or with 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He hath showed thee, O man, what is good, and what doth the Lord require of thee, but to do justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God. God's never required that we offer our firstborn son for our sin. There's only one that's ever done that, and that's God himself. All right, so the question was asked there, what should we do? Well, God said very simply, do justly, love mercy, walk humbly with thy God. Now, in Micah, we see this prophecy here again of Moab, and how that it ties together with Numbers chapter 24. Zephaniah's prophecy, let's turn over there to chapter 2, is a millennial prophecy, I do believe, and possibly Jeremiah's is as well. But in Zephaniah chapter 2, I want to read verse 1 through 11. Zephaniah 2, verse number 1, Gather yourselves together, ye gather together, yea, gather together, O nation, not desire, before the decree bring forth, before the day passes the chaff, before the fierce anger of the Lord come upon you, before the day of the Lord's anger come upon you. Seek ye the Lord, all ye meek of the earth, which have wrought his judgment. Seek righteousness, seek meekness. It may be ye shall be hid in the day of the Lord's anger. The Bible says the meek will inherit the earth. So he refers to that here. Well, notice verse number 4, For Gaza shall be forsaken, and Ashkelon a desolation. They shall drive out Ashdod at the noonday, and Ekron shall be rooted up. Woe unto the inhabitants of the sea coast, the nation of the Cherethites. The word of the Lord is against you, O Canaan, the land of the Philistines. I will even destroy thee, that there shall be no inhabitant. In the sea coast shall be dwellings and cottages for shepherds and folds for flocks. And the coast shall be for the remnant of the house of Judah. I want you to notice here that God prophesies that these nations would be destroyed, but Judah would take over. They shall feed thereupon, in the houses of Ashkelon shall they lie down in the evening, for the Lord their God shall visit them and turn away their captivity. I have heard the reproach of who? Moab, and the revilings of the children of Ammon. There they are. Whereby they have reproached my people. Notice that. They have reproached my people and magnified themselves against their border. Therefore, as I live, saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, surely Moab shall be as Sodom, and the children of Ammon as Gomorrah, even the breeding of nettles and salt pits, and a perpetual desolation. The residue of my people shall spoil them, and the remnant of my people shall possess them. This shall they have for their pride, because they have reproached and magnified themselves against the people of the Lord of hosts. The Lord will be terrible unto them, for he will famish all the gods of the earth, and men shall worship him. Now this is where the millennial prophecy is coming in here. There's coming a day when the gods of the earth will cease to be worshipped. And the God of Israel, the Christian God that we serve in our day, will be worshipped. And it says, everyone from his place, even all the isles of the heathens. Now, we notice next, as we go back to our text in Numbers 24, I want to look at verse 17 through 19. Numbers 24, verse number 17. And it says here, I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and shall smite the corners of Moab, and destroy all the children of Seth. And Edom shall be a possession. Seir, that's Mount Seir, that's the Edomites, that's the descendants of Esau. Also shall be a possession for his enemies, and Israel shall do valiantly. Out of Jacob shall come he that shall have dominion. Notice that. And shall destroy him that remaineth of the city. Now, Gill's commentary says, verse number 17, which Aben Ezra interprets of David, though he says many interpret it of the Messiah. Notice there in verse 17 it says, a star out of Jacob and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. So it can refer to David or the Messiah, and there are some writers, both Jewish and Christian, this is Gill speaking, that understand it partly of David and partly of Christ, and chiefly of him, Christ, the fulfillment of which was only in part in David, but principally and completed in Christ. So if you go over to 2 Samuel 8, we notice here we'll read about David's conquering of the peoples that surrounded. We know, as we've studied recently and in times past, the conquerings of David, but David was a man that he was the only king that really went after the enemies of God and destroyed and subdued these enemies in a mighty way. He was a conquering king. Now we notice in 2 Samuel verse number 8, verse number 1. 2 Samuel 8:1, and after this it came to pass that David smote the Philistines and subdued them, and David took Meth-Gamma and out of the hand of the Philistines, and he smote Moab and measured them with a line, casting them down to the ground. Even with 2 lines measured he to put to death, and with 1 full line to keep alive. And so the Moabites became David's servants and brought gifts. Now go down to verse 6. Then David put garrisons in Syria of Damascus, and the Syrians became servants to David and brought gifts. That means they were paying taxes. And the Lord preserved David whithersoever he went. And David took the shields of gold that were on the servants of Hadazer and brought them to Jerusalem. And from Betah and from Borothai, the cities of Hadadezer, King David took exceeding much brass. When Toi, king of Hamath, heard that David had smitten all the host of Hadadezer, then Toi sent Joram his son unto King David to salute him and to bless him, because he had fought against Hadadezer and smitten him. For Hadadezer had wars with Toi, and Joram brought with him vessels of silver, vessels of gold, and vessels of brass. David was getting wealthier and wealthier because of his conquest against the enemies of God, which also King David did dedicate, notice verse 11, did dedicate unto the Lord with the silver and gold that he had dedicated of all nations which he subdued. What did he dedicate them for? Well, he had in the back of his mind one of these days he was going to build a temple to God. God didn't let him do it, but he let Solomon do it. And we notice here that he had prepared much silver, much gold, and much brass. If you read about the building of the temple, all of this was laid up in store for Solomon. It was in warehouses, and it was there. Where did it come from? It came from the enemies of God. Bible says the wealth of the wicked is laid up for the righteous, and we see that even David's day as he conquested against these nations. And why did he do that? Well, God told him to, number one, and God had given a commandment that Israel would subdue a certain portion of that land, and it would be theirs. He said, this is yours, but they had to go get it. The problem was none of the kings except David went after the land. None of them went after, conquested against these folks and conquered them, and then allowed his own people to live in that area. That's what God wanted them to do. Now, we're going to change gears and look at Amalek now. Go back to Numbers 24 and verse 20. Numbers 24 and verse number 20. So we'll see here, and this to me gets even more interesting, this study of Amalek in this passage, because of what it represents. But in Numbers 24, verse number 20, it says, and when he looked on Amalek, this is again Balaam speaking. Balaam is prophesying. And he looked on Amalek, and he took up his parable and said, Amalek was the first of the nations, but his latter end shall be he that perisheth forever. All right, we studied that idea of the latter end. We notice in this passage he's talking about Amalek now. And it says he was the first of the nations. What's that mean? Well, we go back to Genesis 36 and find out exactly what it means. Amalek was the first of the nations to declare war on Israel. And so they set themselves up as a target for God. Go to Genesis 36 and verse number 9. Genesis 36, verse 9, it says, these are the generations of Esau, the father of the Edomites. Now, we saw Lot and Ammon and Moab involved as becoming, not Lot himself, but the descendants of Moab, descendants of Ammon, becoming enemies of Israel. And then we see in this passage the descendants of Esau. Well, who's that? That's Jacob's brother. Okay, so Jacob had some sons and some grandsons, right? I mean, they're all coming from this same line. But notice in verse 9, these are the generations of Esau, the father of the Edomites in Mount Seir. Go to verse number 12. And Timnah was concubine to Eliphaz, Esau's son, and she bare to Eliphaz, who? Amalek. These were the sons of Adau, Esau's wife. All right, so Amalek's born of a concubine of Esau's son. And so it would be Esau's grandson, Amalek was, technically. All right, so we see where the beginnings of these nations start. Okay, but what's the big deal about Amalek? Well, there's a big deal, really. There's a lot in here. Notice, go back to Exodus chapter 14, and we're not going to read this, but I want you to just glance at it. Exodus 14, we have the Red Sea crossing, Egyptian army floating on the shore there in the last several verses of Exodus 14. Exodus 16 is, well, Exodus 15 is Moses' song. Exodus 16 is quail and manna sent. And then Exodus 17, Moses smites the rock at Horeb for water because they were thirsty. There was no water for 3 days. So Exodus 17 is where we're going to be. So I want to stop there just for a moment. Israel is just recently come from Egypt. They just crossed the Red Sea. These people, they were slaves. They weren't warriors. They had no battle history. The men that they had were good workers, obviously, probably had calloused hands and were strong as oxes, but at the same time, they did not have weapons. Well, they did now, because God allowed the weapons of the Egyptian army to float, and they grabbed them on the seashore of the Red Sea after the Egyptian army was destroyed. So they had some weapons. But I want you to notice something in Exodus 17, verse number 8. Exodus 17, 8. Then came Amalek. It's up almost poetry. Then came Amalek and fought with Israel in Rephidim. And Moses said unto Joshua, choose you out men and go out and fight with Amalek. For tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in mine hand. So Joshua did as Moses had said to him, and fought with Amalek. And Moses and Aaron and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And it came to pass when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed. And when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands were heavy. And they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat thereon, and Aaron and Hur stayed up his hands, the one on the one side, the one on the other side. And his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And Joshua discomfited Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. And the Lord said unto Moses, write this for a memorial in a book, and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua, for I will utterly put out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. That's what God said. And Moses built an altar and called the name of it Jehovah Nissi. For he said, behold, the Lord hath sworn that the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. Now, been a lot of sermons, I think, from preachers that have studied this out, and I know Amalek is referred to as a type of the flesh. Okay, I will just stop and look at that just for a moment. In other words, if there was no Satan, and if there was no demons, would everything be perfect? Still got this flesh, right? So I've still got to fight the flesh. And you've still got to fight the flesh. So Amalek is a type of the flesh in the sense that God says you're going to war with Amalek forever, from generation to generation. We'll never not war with the flesh no matter what age we're at. All right, so let's put that in the back of our minds. But I want to notice something else. Amalek was the first to come against God's people, the first. The Lord himself declared war on them. Amalek may be considered as a type of Antichrist, whose hand is against the throne of God and his saints. Amalek may represent all that oppose God. Example, Satan, Satan's demons, and those devoted to Satan's work. Okay? We see this. God says here that the Lord will war with Amalek from generation to generation. God declared war on Amalek. Okay? They came out against Israel, and we're going to notice what the word says about this. I want you to notice when they came out against Israel. Go to Deuteronomy chapter 25 and read these 3 very important verses. Deuteronomy 25 and verse number 17. It says here, remember what Amalek did unto thee by the way, when ye were come forth out of Egypt, how he met thee by the way, and smote the hindmost of thee, even all that were feeble behind thee, when thou wast faint and weary, and he feared not God. Therefore it shall be, when the Lord thy God hath given thee rest from all thine enemies round about, in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance to possess it, that thou shalt blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven, thou shalt not forget it. That's what God says. He's telling his people of Israel, don't you forget what Amalek did. God declared war on Amalek, okay? As far as I know, it's never been rescinded. I don't find anywhere in Scripture where it's been rescinded. So let's think about this for a moment. When did Amalek come out against Israel? Well, find out where I'm at in my notes. When God himself declares war, he means business. Joshua led the army in battle, and Moses held up the rod of God. All right? We're going to detour a moment, look at Exodus chapter 4. What's significant about the rod of God? Well, as he held the rod of God up, they prevailed. When his hands got weary and the rod of God was down, Amalek prevailed. Let's look at Exodus chapter 4, verse number 1. Exodus 4:1, and Moses answered and said, but behold, they will not believe me, nor hearken unto my voice, for they will say, the Lord hath not appeared unto thee. And the Lord said unto him, what is that in thine hand? And he said, a rod. And he said, cast it on the ground. And he cast it on the ground, and it became a serpent. And Moses fled from before it. And the Lord said unto Moses, put forth thine hand, and take it by the tail. Smart. And he put forth his hand, and caught it, and became a rod in his hand, that they may believe that the Lord God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, hath appeared unto thee. Now, the rod of God. It's interesting item, right? Joshua led the army in battle. Moses held the rod of God up. Now, this is the only battle we know of where Moses was required of God to do this. But he was here. Now, this word rod comes from H4294 in Strong's. Hebrew word means a branch or a ruling scepter. Also can mean a tribe, like the tribe of Judah, used for chastening, ruling, and support. So this rod has multiple meanings. It's not just a shepherd's rod. This rod had a very significant, a lot of significance to it. All right? Now, so we see Clark's commentary says, though God alone would give them victory, yet it was necessary to show them that it was by the influence of Moses that they got it. Okay? Joshua was leading them as a commander out in the field. He told Joshua, he said, you go down there and you pick out some men and you go to fight against them. But I want to understand something. They had just recently left Egypt. And the people of Israel was not fully behind Moses yet. In fact, they murmured so there in chapter 17 of Exodus that they couldn't find no water for 3 days. They began to murmur. They wanted to go back home. They were not willing to follow Moses any longer. And so God said, take your rod, smite the rock, which this was a type of Christ. Christ is the rock. He smote the rock, and out of it came water, you see. So out of Christ comes the living water. Now, so he used the rod to smite the rock. And the folks had plenty of water. I imagine it probably just became a river of sorts. Now, so this word rod's important, but the influence of Moses was important here, and God wanted to establish Moses in their eyes as a key figure. Now, if in this passage in Exodus 17, if Moses didn't continue to hold up his hands to pray, Amalek prevailed. By Moses holding up the rod of God, he was declaring victory through the power of heaven manifesting itself on earth. Think about this now. This rod, we went back to Exodus 4 and we learned about it. The rod of God was Moses' shepherd's rod. That's all it was. God turned a simple thing into a powerful spiritual tool. You see, I mean, he turned it into a snake. The rod, he said, throw it on the ground. It became a snake, probably a big one. Moses fled from it. God said, pick it up by the tail, of course. So he picked it up, became a rod again. And so God told him, he said, I'm going to take this rod and I'm going to do something with that rod. I'm going to make you look supernatural in the eyes of God's people with this rod, which he did. So in this situation, here the rod of God was held up, but Moses' hands got heavy. And we notice here, Moses holding up the rod of God, he was declaring victory. He was declaring victory through the power of heaven manifesting itself on earth. Go back to chapter 17. We'll look at verse 11. Exodus 17, verse 11. It says, it came to pass when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed, and when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. Now, that's just kind of odd, isn't it? That a war would be won or lost based on Moses up there on the hill with the rod of God. His hands are getting heavy, and now he's, try holding your hands up for an hour. On both of them. The blood leaves your hands, right? It just becomes a difficult thing to do. And so as his hands got heavy, then Israel began to lose. Now we notice here in verse number 10, Joshua did as Moses had said to him and fought with Amalek, and Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And it came to pass when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed, and when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. Amalek attacked God's people being unprovoked, not fearing God. They had no compassion on their own kindred. They went against them when they were already suffering in affliction and feeble and faint and weary. I want to stop and I want to put some things in perspective. By the time Joshua had taken some men and gone to war against the army of Amalek, Amalek had already begun to destroy the laggers, those that were behind. Maybe the older folks, maybe some young children. They killed them. So now Israel's frantic. We didn't have any food. Now we're having to eat manna. We didn't have any water. We got some, out of the rock. They were perplexed. Now we have this Amalek coming against us. This was their first battle in the wilderness. And Amalek came in unprovoked against them. And what did he do? He went after their feeble. They didn't come at man to man and stand against them in the way and say, bring your men of war out, we're going to go to war. No, they went in behind, they subverted, they picked off the stragglers, the weak and feeble. God personally sees to the advancement of his kingdom on earth. Israel was days out of Egypt, days out of Egyptian bondage, and then came Amalek. Wow. They might as well have attacked God himself. Zephaniah's prophecy, which we already looked at that. We're on the wrong page. Where's my 4 at? Page 4, here it is. Almost done. When Israel was at the Red Sea, God had to work a miracle, and he did. He told Moses, he said, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. He didn't say that here. What did he say? He said, go fight. Sometimes we stand and watch God work. Sometimes God says, go fight. Amalek came against Israel, and Moses told Joshua, choose us out men and go out and fight with Amalek. Because God said there's going to be war against Amalek from generation to generation. Now, we can apply that to the flesh. Okay, that's fine. We're going to war against this flesh forever till the day we die. But at the same time, God was also declaring war against this people. They were a type of Antichrist in the sense that they came out subversively against God's people, and they attacked them unprovoked, and they were an arm of Satan himself. The devil doesn't fight fair. Have you ever been in a fair fight with the devil? I haven't. In fact, usually when I'm down, that's when he tries to kick me in the teeth, right? You'll notice that. But see here, the word fight in Hebrew, this is interesting. I want to close with this. The word fight, you would think, Moses told Joshua, said, now get you some men, you go out there and fight, and we'll watch and see what happens. No. The word fight in Hebrew means to consume and to destroy in battle, to devour, overcome, and prevail. That's what it means. He told Joshua, he said, you go out and you consume them, you destroy them, you devour, you overcome, and you prevail. That's the kind of charge he gave them. He didn't say go out there and fight and we'll see what happens. No, he said, you go fight and you win. As God's people, we need to have that mentality. Why is it that we don't, so much of the time, have the mentality of going against the flesh, going against the devil, and going against the world in the sense, not as Christians, we know we fight in love. We present the gospel of Jesus Christ. We don't use a sword. But against the enemies of God, against Satan's forces, we don't show love, do we? Why did God write Ephesians chapter 6? He said, put on the whole armor of God. Stand, therefore. Stand against the principalities, the powers of darkness, wickedness in high places, you see. They are enemies of God and God's people, you see. So yes, we are to win the lost, all who will hear the gospel. But at the same time, we stand for God, and we stand and fight. Ephesians 6:10 talks about that. We won't take time to read it. But I thought that was interesting. That word fight in the Hebrew had a very special connotation to it, a very special victorious message. All right, let's stand and be dismissed in prayer, and we'll be praying for Brother Clayton as he prepares for the lesson today. And